The war involving Iran is entering a more uncertain and potentially more dangerous phase. What may look like escalation is, in reality, something more complex, a test of endurance, strategy, and limits. As tensions around Iran continue to evolve, one key question remains. Are we witnessing another cycle of escalation or the beginning of something structurally different? Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Today on Atlantic Lens, I'm joined by Dr. Jim Walsh, an international security expert and senior researcher at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT. He is one of the few Westerners who has spent the last 2 decades entering Iran, sitting down with its leadership, and studying the inner workings of their nuclear program from the inside. Jim, thank you for joining Atlantic Lens.
Happy to be with you.
You've seen the cycles of tension, but the temperature today feels unprecedented. From your perspective, does this moment feel like a continuation of past cycles or something fundamentally different in how Iran is thinking and acting during this conflict?
Well, I definitely think we've reached an inflection point. There's no doubt about it. Uh, and the evidence is overwhelming it. To begin with, the supreme leader, the person who has led Iran for decades, is dead. And much, not much, but some non-trivial slice of the leadership, military and political leadership, has been killed. Uh, and we've conducted a war. The U.S. has now attacked Iran twice in essentially 1 year. So, yeah, things are different now. And it's not clear to me that they're going to go back. Some of the dynamics that were in play previously are still there. But fundamentally, it's hard to imagine that Iran returns to the pre-war country that it was, either in its attitude towards the U.S., its attitude towards its Gulf neighbors, and its attitude towards Israel. I think we'll look back on this as the point in which everything changed in the region.
Your experience in track 2 diplomacy, those off the record, high stake meetings with Iranian officials, gives you a perspective that most analysts lack. Based on those private interactions, how does leadership in Tehran actually process the level of pressure that is being applied right now by the Trump administration, whether it's military, economic, and political? What matters most in their decision making?
Well, it's a big question. There are lots of different dynamics. There are dynamics that lead to unity and lead to division. So, on the one hand, Iran it's as it sees it up until recently, it has viewed this conflict as a fight for survival. I mean, Trump threatened it as a country, continues to threaten bombing its civilian infrastructure, threatened to eliminate it as a civilization, which is about the dumbest thing you can say to an Iranian official.
Why so, if you don't mind giving some context?
So, Persian civilization has been around a long time. And Iran, the Shiite Iran in the middle of Sunni Arab Middle East, has a particular view of its identity and its history, and that it at one point had, a dynastic leadership whose power extended all over the region and beyond. So, there are fights. Iran is one of the more fractious polities. There's, at least prior to this point, there was always fighting between different camps in Iran, and the supreme leader would act as the supreme decider and sort of balance all these competing views and factions and interests and decide the course for the government. But underneath that fractiousness was a identity, cultural identity, a Persian cultural identity rooted in history. And Iranians think of themselves as the people who have inherited a great civilization. So the number one thing you don't want to do is threaten their civilization. They take that very seriously.
And just to finish your thought on what matters most in their decision making?
There are different dynamics. So on the one hand, there's a move towards unity because you're threatening the state. There's nothing worse you can do to a country than threaten the existence of the state. When states are in fights for survival, they're all in. And so many times differences are suppressed in an effort to beat the threatening adversary. Still, it is also the case that Iran has been fractious in the past. Now its leadership has been decimated, and presumably the Revolutionary Guard has more power now than it has ever had in the Islamic Republic's history, given the assassinations and the other developments. So you can see the tension already during this conflict. Recently, their foreign minister came out after Trump or after the Lebanon-Israeli ceasefire had been declared. Iran came out and said, "Well, if with the ceasefire, we're going to open the straits." And then both conservative press in Iran and IRG officials spoke publicly criticizing the foreign minister for having said that. So there are still tensions in Iran because there's a de facto supreme leader, but that person is not consolidated their power. They're not public. They're not visible. It's not a normal time. And so behind the scenes, I'm sure there's a lot of struggles, even though the different factions are unified in believing that this is a fight for survival and they'll do whatever it takes to win that fight. So um, the end result, I think, is that in this war of wills between the United States and Iran, and I say it's a war of wills because it's a question of who can put up with the punishment and the suffering more, who will give in first, who faces a deadline. I think Iran is unified enough and committed enough that they can hold out. And whereas the U.S., I don't think wants to stay in the Persian Gulf with its navy forever and ever, with higher and higher gas prices. So Iran may be somewhat divided, but given what the punishment they faced and the threat they faced, I think they're going to hunker down and do what has to be done to sort of see this through to the end.
Right. The regime has way more supporters in this context. And is there anyone left arguing for diplomacy in these rooms?
In Iran, it's hard to say right now. First of all, if anyone knew where the rooms were and who was in them, Israel would probably bomb them. So they're under really
Which
strong
has happened before.
counterintelligence obligations not to make the leadership vulnerable, given the record of assassination that we've witnessed over this past month. So no one, I'm not in those rooms. I don't know what's being said. But I expect that there are the conversations, there's still going to be voices in favor of negotiation and a settlement. And those voices will carry less weight, given everything that's happened, right? It'll be hawks that will predominate in those conversations, not doves, to put it in simplistic terms. You don't attack people and then expect the doves to sort of win the argument at the table. So the doves are disadvantaged, but the reality is they need some sort of agreement. So Iran, at this point, it thinks it has won, and it thinks the U.S. is going to leave. And so it needs an agreement so the U.S. does leave and Iran can get to the business of rebuilding after all the bombing and the destruction. But Iran believes that the U.S. needs to end this. It's more urgent that the U.S. ends it than Iran ends it. So Iran wants an end, but it'll wait until the U.S. is willing to compromise on some things. But it
Which
wants
thing?
an agreement. It wants an agreement, and the diplomats are going to have to do that. And the public is going to be tired of suffering. And at some point, the blockade effects are going to kick in, and that's going to be unpleasant. So there's no avoiding the reality that there has to be, Iran has to have an agreement. The question is how much leverage they think they have and how much they're willing to push the U.S. on this.
What would you say would be the sine qua non, like requirements for Iran to come to an agreement?
In some ways, we've had lots of negotiations and lots of agreements over the years. So I think everyone sort of knows what that looks like, even if they don't like the way it looks. Uh, some pillars are immovable. There will be sanctions relief. There's not going to be a deal unless there's sanctions relief. There probably won't be a deal without some sort of action on the nuclear program, which is probably a suspension of enrichment. But Iran is not going to ship out all its equipment. It'll agree to suspend what it's doing, sort of what the North Koreans did with its nuclear program under past agreements, and which would be new. They've never suspended before. That would be new. Trump can claim that's a win, but it's not going to be forever. The Iranians are saying 5 years suspension. The U.S. is saying 20 years. Logic would tell you it's going to be somewhere in between. So that'll be part of it, and then there'll be some issues that they're going to paper over. It took 2 years, really 3 years, to negotiate the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the first Iran deal that Trump tore up. It's going to take more than 2 weeks to have resolution of these decades-old complex problems. So what does that mean? It means some of the problems are just going to be papered over. So the 60%, the disposition of that 60% enriched uranium that is in Iran somewhere, maybe under the bombed sites, maybe not. But in any case, that 60% enriched uranium, what's going to happen to that? They're going to have to push that off. That's going to have some time frame and some framework and blah, 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 blah. And, but that's not being worked out in 2 weeks. So there's some things they can do now. And the things both sides will insist on is some movement on nuclear, some movement on sanctions, some sort of understanding that the strait will not be closed, and some understanding given by the U.S., some assurance that it won't turn around and attack Iran. Now, both those last two that I mentioned, a promise not to hold the straits hostage, a strait hostage, and a promise not to attack Iran, those will be promises. But I think each side wants to hear that promise, even though it's an unenforceable promise, even though it may not last as a promise. I think both sides want to hear the other side saying that out loud for pride or for political cover. And so that'll be part of it too. But listen, what can you negotiate, especially the U.S. team? I hate to say this, it's a bunch of amateurs and they don't know what they're doing. So until they get their act together, it's not going to move very fast. And even if when they get their act together, it's not going to move very fast. And if there's one thing the U.S. wants, it's fast resolution. So we'll get an agreement. It'll be bare bones. There'll be some big symbolic stuff. Both sides will move on things that are important to the other. And then a giant chunk of stuff is going to be kicked off to the future.
Fascinating. Jim, you have sat down with the president of Iran and their foreign minister every single year for the last 20 years, a rare vantage point. We constantly hear that Iran is on a nuclear threshold. What does that actually mean in practice? Are we closer to a real decision point, or is Tehran still finding value in a space of strategic ambiguity?
Well, that really is the question going forward, isn't it? I mean, so far, Iran had adopted a nuclear strategy that experts call latency. It wanted to have a nuclear weapons capability, the option to develop a bomb, but had not made the decision to cross that line. That was a U.S. intelligence finding going back to 2013 and reaffirmed every year in the U.S. intelligence community's annual threat assessment that they had achieved a nuclear weapons capability. And the only thing preventing that from becoming a nuclear weapon was the political decision to do so. That was true in 2013.
Wow.
It's certainly true in 2026, but in spades. In 2013, Iran did not have, 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. And in 2013, it hadn't built its sixth generation centrifuge, going from an IR1, which is pretty primitive as centrifuges go, to an advanced IR6. So, they are the thresholdiest state of the threshold states. They need only inch across and they will have crossed the line to nuclear weapons. And so the question is, have they changed their mind? Their
Mhm.
longstanding view that we're going to stay in this zone of ambiguity where we have an option, but we're not going to cross the line? Or are they going to say, you know, I can't say the phrase I would say, but expletive deleted, we'll show you guys we're going to get the bomb. And I think there are major pressures for them to do that. They don't have any friends. Israel is essentially unleashed in the region. Uh, and when I say they don't have any friends, traditionally they have adopted a deterrence policy based on alliances with Hezbollah and Lebanon and Syria, and to a lesser extent, really marginally with the Houthis. But that, that's now how many years after the Hamas attack, those allies, Syria, Assad is gone, and Hezbollah is on its back feet, and Israel is invading and taking a giant piece of Lebanon. So its traditional form of defense no longer exists. And it's not like Russia and China, who have been supportive in indirect ways to Iran, but they're not sending troops. There's no one to defend them. Um, and so I'm sure they feel pretty alone and pretty vulnerable. And the question is either out of anger, given two big military attacks on the country and threats to eliminate their civilization, and the assassination of the political leadership. Whether the emotion and anger generated by that leads them to say, fine, we're going to get the bomb now, or whether just sort of strategic calculation that says we're vulnerable and we don't have anything else to protect ourselves. I worry about that. Now, it could play out differently, but I think there's just a major risk that they will come out of this experience saying, we tried it this other way. That didn't work. We're going to go ahead and do what we can to protect ourselves, and we're going to build a bomb. That's what I fear.
Great insight. And let me take that one step further. The justification for this conflict, one we've heard in different forms before, is the prevention of an Iranian nuclear bomb. But after the bombing and destruction of several facilities, I have to ask, are we actually achieving anything here? Can the US truly extinguish a nuclear program through force?
No, I don't think there's a military answer here. I mean, Trump loves the military, and loves to use it, but there's some problems that the military cannot solve. You would have thought that the US would have learned that, for example, after Iraq, that the military can't do nation building, doesn't do that very well. It can't solve nuclear problems. Now, you can blow up a bunch of buildings, but you can't bomb the knowledge and experience of Iranian engineers and technicians out of their heads. They've built literally thousands of centrifuges, more than 30,000 centrifuges. They haven't forgotten that because you blow up a building. So I think eliminating capability is very difficult. Once a country has capability, once the horse is out of the barn, you have to persuade the horse to come back in. You can't force the horse back in. They have to decide that it's in the horse's interest to go back to being in the barn and living peacefully. And that's not the situation now. So military force, you can use it to threaten and get countries to try to agree, but it's a weird way to achieve an objective because you're making them feel vulnerable, which makes them want to have the bomb. Like that's, a contradiction.
Actually
So
reinforces
it
the goal.
reinforces the reason why they would want it in the first place. Exactly so. And of course, let's be honest here. This whole thing about war, Trump is going to warn Iran over the nuclear weapons program is just, is absurd. It's nonsense. He came out of June saying they had obliterated the program. So why would you have to attack again 6 months later if you had already obliterated the program? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Basically, he's doing what many presidents do. George W. Bush did this, which is invoke nuclear as a justification for whatever it is you actually want to do. We've cycled through 5 different justifications for the US war in Iran, and none of them have held up. It was supposed to be about the nuclear program that was already obliterated. It was supposed to be about regime change. That didn't happen. It was supposed to eliminate Iran's missiles and rocket capability. Clearly, you're not going to eliminate a low-grade but powerful military instrument. It's not hard to build a drone, right? I think Ukraine has demonstrated that. So, and Iran, has demonstrated that and was selling drones to the Russians to use in their war. So, eliminating what is a fairly basic industry by bombing it from the skies, that's not going to work. And they continue to be able to threaten the Strait. They continue to be able to launch missiles. So all these so-called justifications, I think, were after the fact rationales. They wanted to do this. They did it. They thought Iran was going to roll over in 2 days. They thought it was going to be quick and easy with the emphasis on quick. And then that didn't happen. And now they're stuck coming up with justifications for this thing that isn't working out.
And that brings us to the why. Many theories have surfaced about the end goal of this war. In your opinion, what is the end game here?
Well, I know what the end game was supposed to be. The end game was supposed to be U.S. unleashes shock and awe, kills the leadership, Iran waves a white flag and gives up, and then it becomes Venezuela too. That was the complete theory of victory. That was the complete rationale. I don't like you. You're a pain in my neck. I'm going to eliminate you and look like a hero. And then that didn't happen. I think that's what the war was about. It was, there's lobbying from Saudi Arabia, more lobbying from Israel. It has to do also with the sort of broken national security decision-making process we have in the US right now that Trump has basically blown up. So there are lots of things that play into this as a bad decision. Him just deciding on a whim that he wants to do it based on his gut. But at the end of the day, he has made this about him. That is to say, Trump has made this about Trump's desires.
Realistic desires, shall we say?
I would say fever dreams.
Okay.
And he wanted it. He thought it was going to be cake. He did it. And now he finds himself in a hole.
To wrap up, if there's one single development, one specific signal in the coming weeks that would tell you whether this situation is stabilizing or truly slipping beyond anyone's control, what would that be?
Well, to simplify matters, I'm focused on the talks, which is, you want to give yourself a headache, do that. But there are two ways this thing ends. It's going to end, right? The U.S. is not going to keep its Navy in the Persian Gulf forever. It can't. And so it either ends with an agreement or it ends where the U.S. just walks away and things sort of settle up on their own, more or less messy and incomplete. Now, if it's going to settle up with an agreement, that's going to happen because of the negotiations. So I'm watching the talks. I expect that they'll get back on board. I expect that there'll be better quality discussions than there were the last time. Hopefully someone's learned some lessons here. The deal that has been there since before May is still there. It provides face saving to Trump and allows Iran to claim victory and then go lick its wounds. And then it's a question of whether psychologically and politically can the two sides bring themselves to do the thing they need to do. And they'll do it eventually. But while they wait to do it, the costs will continue to increase day by day by day. So they really don't want to settle up, but they're being forced to settle up. So if they'll settle up, they'll do it through negotiation. So I'm watching the talks.
Bonus question here. Jim, I know that obviously nuclear is a big field, but looking at the recent string of deaths and disappearances involving 11 nuclear scientists, including another MIT researcher, Nun Lorairu, who I know you didn't know personally, even if you look at these events superficially, Could there be a discernible pattern here?
I'm skeptical about the link. It's not something I've spent a lot of time looking at. Obviously, it's true that both the US and Israel have made a point of killing Iranian scientists over time. And, it would be expected that Iran would seek tit for tat retaliation. Um, but right now, once the bomb started flying, at least, so let's say for the last year or so, priorities have changed for both countries, I think. Israel continued to try to take out Israeli nuclear officials and scientists during the opening days of the war. But right now, as the war has spread and has become more complex, and where the stakes have gotten higher, the whole issue of nuclear scientists is sort of not as is less important and not as burning a question as the larger questions of will Iran survive? Will the world economy be torn asunder because of what's happening in the Strait? Those things are occupying everyone's attention and time. And so the tale of the scientists is the ones that have been assassinated, the ones about whom questions remain is a difficult one. But I think we should wait on the facts here and not get ahead of ourselves.
Definitely. Dr. Jim Walsh, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Absolutely.
This is clearly a moment where the trajectory remains uncertain, but the stakes are increasingly difficult to ignore. I'm Marta Daniz. Thanks for joining Atlantic Lens.